And Eniye, did you want to just tell the audience what you used to say at the time?
Yeah. I honestly felt like it was a bit much. Like every single day there was a delivery of yet another book on leadership, and that's all he was consumed with.
Welcome to Business Leaders Coach, where we educate, equip, enable, and empower you to become the best leader that you can be. My name is Toye Oshunbiyi. I'm the founder of Business Leaders Coach, and today is a special episode. In fact, it's the beginning of special episodes, as I'm joined by someone who has been on this leadership journey with me for years, and that's my wife, Eniye.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have Eniye join us for this second season. I've had about 50 episodes so far. They've all been solo, and maybe some of you have been bored just listening to myself. And so I thought, you know what, why don't we do this together, Eniye, since this is a topic that obviously is important to the two of us. Just a bit of background about Eniye. She's a leadership coach, focuses on self-awareness, and has obviously brought me to a lot of awareness. And so we're going to be spending time just in these episodes talking through different topics. Obviously, our target audience are founders, CEOs, and senior leaders. And today, the topic is all about why leadership matters. But first of all, Eniye, just want to share a bit about yourself?
Yes. So, hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me on today. I know you've been trying for a long time to get me onto this.
That is right.
And I don't know why it's not. I've been very resistant and doing other things. But it's great to join you in this new series. So why is leadership important, and what's my relationship, I suppose, and journey on leadership? So I suppose I would say that my journey of leadership began, sort of when I worked in an organization and, was made a leader. So I was starting with managing people and then going into leadership roles, leading whole departments, overseeing different functions, and all the way to present day now coaching and mentoring leaders. But I think, on that topic of why leadership is important, I remember the first time that I really understood about the heart of leadership was, I think it was around 2007, when I worked for a leadership development organization. And their aim was to recruit and train leaders to serve in challenging urban schools. So it was, sort of under the education sector. And one of the things that really stood out to me is they were looking for leaders, not leaders who were interested in title or position or career development, but at the core of their recruitment process was looking for leaders with a moral purpose. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that, but that really stood out to me because in a way, what they were doing was kind of weeding out people who came with an ulterior motive. So we'll talk a bit more about that. But I think at the core, I realized that actually leadership is so much more than just title and position. And it's leadership from the inside out.
We have a friend who talks about that.
Absolutely. Yes. Shout out to Obi. So what about you? What's your journey of leadership? I know you're going to bring something up here, but I'm going to take a risk and ask you, what's your journey of leadership?
Yes. I mean, so my journey of really realizing the importance of leadership starts, I think it's 2000, maybe 2001. I worked for the church at the time. I was working full time as a minister, but I had no clue of what I was doing. There was no training. You were just thrown into the deep end. And I was overwhelmed. I was really overwhelmed. And in a way, that's what got me to reading a lot of books. And so I went to a bookshop, and there I saw these VHS tapes.
Ooh, now you're showing your age.
I know, yeah. VHS videotapes. And it says, Developing the Leader Within You. There's two tapes, and then another two, Developing the Leaders Around You. And I was like, that is exactly what I need. And that was by John Maxwell. And the cost was it was enormous. I mean, it was about 1/3 of my salary at the time.
Oh, wow.
And I remember going up and down thinking, can I afford this? Can I afford this? But I took the plunge and I bought it, and I sat down and watched them, and it just changed everything. Because anybody who knows about John Maxwell says one of his famous sayings, everything rises and falls on leadership. And that gave me insight into why I wasn't effective, why I wasn't making things happen, but also the impact that lack of good leadership has on any organization. And right from there, I was sold. And ever since then, I have been a student of leadership. Now, Eniye is laughing for a reason. She's laughing for a reason because ever since then, books came in, reading, developing myself. And Eniye, did you want to just tell the audience what you used to say at the time?
Yeah. I honestly felt like it was a bit much. Like every single day there was a delivery of yet another book on leadership. And that's all he was consumed with. And at the time I was just like, oh, this is a bit too much. A bit too much for me. I think it was a bit of an obsession, though. If you're honest, it was a bit of an obsession.
I wouldn't say that.
But yeah, I think we've come to we've come to a point now where I think our understanding of leadership has merged a lot more. So we've come a long way from then.
Amen to that.
And we're still married.
Yes, exactly. so leadership, and I think everybody, it takes. There's this awareness thing, since you're the self-awareness person, right? It takes, everybody has to sort of go on that journey.
Yeah.
And what I'm really happy about is that, at the right time, you got to that journey of seeing that this is really important. And now you're a leadership coach, and I always try to...
Oh, the irony.
Yeah, take that in. Isn't that interesting, right? But jokes apart, obviously... You shared your personal story, but as a coach, obviously we have that privilege of seeing it also from the leader's perspective, whether the leader has bought into how important leadership is or not. So do you want to share a few things that you've observed, you've noticed around that?
Yeah. So I do coach leaders, but I think even from a personal point of view, I think, just the way I'm wired, I'm a very emotional, empathic person. And I remember just even in my, just my early years of leadership, almost being told or being made to feel that my leadership style was a bit too soft. I needed to be harder. I needed to be harsher. I needed to be, accountable, hold people accountable. And I always felt like, well, you can do that without being, so for me, without being harsh, without being brash, without being this tyrant, and I think I always had this conflict, within me as to why does leadership have to be rah, but obviously growing in that understanding and seeing that actually leadership is an inside out job. You lead from your core values, you lead from who you are. And to working with many, many leaders across different sectors, the story is the same. There is always this conflict. Either leaders feel like they have to be, a certain type of alpha male or alpha female, or the ones who are not feel guilty, about their leadership style. And so, I've had to work with a lot of leaders to embrace their empathic leadership style, or even bring to awareness those who think that their brash style is getting results, and and just even to do that deep introspection as to what is driving that brashness. And when they come to that realization, it really is a game changer. To seeing not just themselves or their particular ambitions, but to seeing the people around them. That leadership is really around developing the people, taking people along with you, not being this kind of crack the whip type of person, or, just focused on profits and profit margins and shareholders and all that sort of thing, which sometimes, has been the case where that's subconsciously what's driving a lot of leadership styles. Things like fear and, insecurity as well. A lot comes out, but I think once leaders become aware of, the subconscious, then, they operate differently. So what's your perspective on this?
I think first of all, obviously working with other leaders, I think the first thing that you come to notice, it doesn't really matter the level of the leader. It could be senior leader, and we have all these titles, but a lot of times people don't even know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And what I have found is that sometimes the more senior the title, the less they even know.
Yeah.
And that's kind of dangerous, because they do more damage.
Yeah.
And that's, again, this is some of the reasons why this topic about leadership matters. Just as you said, people, for instance, won't realize that as they grow in their leadership, they can't just operate from their personality type. They need training, they need awareness, they need to know that not everybody is like them. And this obviously has to start with us personally, because we're not perfect. And I can share one of the pivotal moments for the two of us, right, was when we did our coaching training. Where we were trained on the grow model. And about how to ask questions and how to, because I still remember that weekend that we spent just being trained, and the person who was training us told us that you can actually help people to come to a decision without you telling them anything. And I remember saying to myself, this is rubbish, because I was a tell guy. I was like, you got to tell people what to do. And that was very insightful. Now that's because of the training, not that we were anything, different. It's just that we got equipped with a new way of influencing people. So to come back to the question, my own perspective of the impact that, by us coaching people, you get to understand that, wow, there's a lot of leaders that haven't taken the time to invest in their own development. And that actually is causing more problems than they realize.
Absolutely. And I think I've seen that as well, speaking to or coaching, very senior leaders who they get to a point in their leadership journey and everyone just thinks they're all right.
That's it.
Right. And so they feel the isolation, they feel the insecurity. And what's happening is the people that they're leading are actually growing at a faster rate than they are.
Yes.
And so it fuels that insecurity and it fuels the imposter syndrome, and they feel like, oh my goodness, not realizing that actually you need to keep developing no matter how senior you are. You need to keep developing yourself. And I think that's the case for all of us, that when we stop growing, when we stop investing in our own development, we will feel that insecurity. We will feel the fear of the what ifs and the and the hows. So I think you've hit a really important point there. Just that ongoing personal development and growth is part of leadership. So what, in your experience of working with founders and sort of CEOs and leaders, what do you think are the most common leadership challenges that you hear?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it all depends on, number one, the stage of their business.
Right. Okay.
And the most common is that the leader does not understand and take ownership that it is their responsibility to develop the leaders around them. That's the number one.
Yeah.
Is that it's almost like, well, I've got a title and I'm hiring this other person with their title. They just need to get on with it.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, they might need to just get on with it, because you don't necessarily need to have the skill set. So if you're a CEO and you've got a CEO or CFO, you might not necessarily have that person is the expertise in their field. But what the missing piece is the leadership element. So that CFO is leading a department, and so your responsibility as a leader is to equip them with the know-how of how to deal with the people side. And that's the part that typically is missing, which is that the leadership competencies and skills are different from being able to do the job, the individual contributor part of the job, or the expertise part. And that's the biggest area of challenge that most leaders face. And then also it depends on the stage of their business. So if it's a startup, that's a different kind of phase where you're still maybe doing a lot of the work of getting the revenue in. And then if it gets to another stage where we call the builder, where you're now building a team, that's team building skills. That's a different skill set. And then if you get to the next stage, which is what we're calling the achiever, where you've now got direct reports that have direct reports. That's another skill set about how do you speak to this direct report in a way that you don't speak to that person where they have to go and do the job, but you get them to think about how they're equipping their people. And these are all things that you can't just know it unless you're trained.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that training element is crucial. So I remember, when I was the head of a department and we had like a competency framework where, for each level within the organization, there were competencies. And so whether it was your sort of admin staff, what was the level of leadership expected from them, whether it's self-leadership all the way up to the level 5s and the so each person within the organization, and so when we, so each, whether it's 6 months or, half a year review or, the annual review, you would assess that person based on their leadership level competencies and how they could grow to the next level and the next level and the next level. And I think that's really important. So as you're sharing about, founders and CEOs and kind of their stage of growth within that role, I think it's also important for them to look at the people that they're leading and what level are they in. Because sometimes you can expect more of a person than they actually currently have. Or, you can expect less of someone who actually has more. So knowing where each individual is at is really helpful in developing, sort of their leadership trajectory.
Yeah. So what are some of the biggest gaps that you've seen with some of the leaders that you've worked with? Because obviously I'm leaning towards your self-awareness part, right?
Some of the biggest gaps that I've seen. So I think it's... obviously everyone's different and we're all wired differently. We all have different personality types. And I think one of the biggest gaps that I've seen is where people fail to understand themselves at a deeper level, hence the self-awareness. And so sometimes, a leader is perhaps maybe very introverted and isolate the people around them because they feel like they're an introvert and they just want to do their thing and let everyone do their thing, but they don't really see the importance of getting in there with people whilst you're doing your job, getting involved, in that moment while you're there, within those working hours, you have to come out of yourself in order to lead. Now, yes, you retreat and you get your rest and rejuvenation. But I think sometimes people stick so much within the personality type. And then I've seen the opposite where a leader is very extroverted or empathic and they become maybe a bit too friendly and they don't know how to hold people to account. They don't know how to hold people to account. And so how do we bridge that gap? How do we get you to operate well, within your unique makeup, but still be effective as a leader?
Yeah. And so based on that, what would you suggest people do when they first of all become aware that they are leaning towards their personality strength, if that makes sense? Because in a way, that's what is happening, isn't it? Yeah. So what would you suggest?
Yeah, so I think, sort of leadership is not just about understanding oneself. It's about understanding others, how you relate to others. And that's the thing about EQ and self-awareness. Sometimes we stick to the realm of, I just need to understand myself. But it's actually how you understand yourself, but in relation to others, how we relate and work and love, others. And so I think, one of the first things that I do, when I work with leaders is, sort of getting them to do that self-assessment, that introspection, and then, but also getting them to look at those around them. So sometimes what I would do with a leader is to say, okay, who are those in your team? And I've done exercises where they get to, assess their relationship with each individual, within their team. That way they actually get to see patterns oh, okay, my relationship with this person is like this because I relate to them like this and their personality is like that. And then we can bridge the gap. So, I think that's very important work, for leaders to do. And then obviously providing them with the resources and, the toolkits, that they need. I call it the bag of tricks and, to bridge that gap. So that's what I would do. So, so what about you? What are the some of the frustrations that leaders at the top face, and what do you think the key to changing that is?
Again, similar thing. A few things that people typically say is, how do I motivate my people? They're not engaged. Some of the frustrations is, how do we get people to use their own initiative? How do I know what's really going on? And so it's frustrating on their side, but what they don't realize is that a lot of times they're the ones that create that environment. Motivation, normally, based on what we now know, this is partly the reason why when I'm working with leaders, one of the first things is, what's your vision? What's your purpose? And if it's an organization, is there clarity around the vision and purpose of this organization?
Right.
And that's the first sort of area, because if you want people to use their own initiative, then they need to know where they're going and need to be inspiring.
Yeah.
Another area is developing the core values of the organization, because by doing that, not only would you be able to attract the right people into the organization because you know what you stand for, but also you are also trying to create a culture where this is how we all behave.
That you create a compass, right? That directs everyone.
Exactly. So those are the solutions to the frustration. But a lot of times, what we see overall is people would have these events where they talk about their vision statement and core values, away day, have that all nicely on PowerPoints and everything, and then they come back and then they just put it in the drawer.
Back to business as
exactly. And that's partly the reason why coaching is essential, because coaching can keep that conversation going.
Yeah, the accountability.
The accountability part, But those are some of the frustrations that I see typically on a regular basis. But also just coming back to what you were talking about, people's strengths, because as you were talking, I was reminded that the two of us, and we've done something called Tetramap. Some of you might know Tetramap is like a personality communication profiling thing. I met many years ago, and I've always shared this when I've trained this, that my wife and I went away on a holiday, in a hotel with.
Well, it was a week. It was supposed to be a weekend away.
Supposed to be a weekend.
Well, I thought would be a romantic weekend away.
But I went with the flip chart. Yeah.
I was conned.
We went with the flip chart and markers, and the whole idea was for us to go through Tetramap, which is a way of, as I said, what would you say is more of a communication preference, as more like a personality profile.
Kind of,
And we found, we were both almost like, we don't use the word opposites, but definitely our strengths were in the different boxes.
And we do tend to come out at the opposite end of the spectrums in most personality profiles. We do come at the extreme ends.
Yeah, and just like what you were saying, that so it's more of drawing into the middle.
Yeah.
So the areas where you are like, this is how you operate, I see it different.
Yeah, so it's really about how your strengths complement my weaknesses and my weaknesses complement your strengths. And then how can we work together?
Collaborate, yeah. So I always share that, and I think that's how it works, isn't it?
Sure.
Where you realize that, okay, this is not and it's not actually that I should then excuse myself for not being in that way, because I think I can also be a bit more of your strengths. I can learn that.
Sure.
It just it takes more effort. And
we tend to stay within our comfort zones. But I think that's what brings about conflict, whether in marriage or within organizations, is where we try and stay within our comfort zone. We feel frustrated, with the other person. I think of the times when I feel frustrated, why can't you do this? Or you might feel frustrated with me, why can't you? But it's because we're just wired very differently. And so learning to understand, the other person and how they operate, and give a bit more wiggle room and grace and understanding, which is hard when the chips are down. It's hard to do that.
It could be, yes.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, this is our first episode together. And so do you want to just give a bit of a flavor of what other listeners can expect from you moving forward?
Ooh. Well, we'll be talking all things leadership, but with a very human focus. Leaders are humans. And I think in my work as a self-awareness coach, I am very, very aware of that, when I come into a space, with a leader, I'm working with a human being who has a real life outside of work, real issues and problems. They have families, they have, partners and children and pressures that they face in life. And so what we're going to be doing is just really exploring leadership and the power of self-awareness in leadership, and why self-awareness is key, is one of the most important skills that a leader can have. And I think along the way, I'll be talking about my journal, the 91 Days to Self-Awareness, a reflective journal.
And the second volume is soon to drop.
Second volume coming out
so
soon.
We put the description, the links in the description.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And but even the story behind the journal is years of data collection from the key themes that were coming out from my leadership coaching sessions. And so taking note of those things and thinking, wow, these are the things that leaders need to keep reflecting on to refine their leadership skills, to grow their self-awareness within leadership, and to improve, their decision making. So we'll be talking a lot more about that in coming episodes, and I look forward to it. And you?
Yeah, well, I've got my ebook dropping soon, the 5 Daily Habits. Where you can be productive every day. It's just dealing with this VUCA world that we're in. I've been working on that for a number of years now. And other things that I'm sure that we'll be talking about is this whole development plan that each leader should have, knowing where they are and how to then navigate into that next sort of season, and the competencies and the character qualities that they need to have. Obviously, we're going to be having some guests, and we'll be interviewing different people that will help us as well on this. But it's looked like a great season to look forward to, all things leadership. And so if you do have any questions, please drop them in the comments. We'll be using some of that as well to shape subsequent episodes moving forward. But for now, from myself and from Eniye, do you want to say last few words?
Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to engaging with you as the season progresses. Take care.
All right. Toye Oshunbiyi, all right, for Business Leaders Coach. Wish you all the best.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.